we've just been talking about money. And I know that seems kind of like an odd thing because, churches don't necessarily have the best reputation when it comes to money. But at the end of the day, and it seems odd because I recognize that you guys are maybe don't have the most interaction with money. And so the thing is why as middle school and high school students should we even be talking about money? And we've tried to kind of cover that this month, and we've gone over just some real basic stuff. And so at the beginning of the month, we simply said, listen, money is not evil. It's just a tool that we can use. And we talked about how we can properly interact with money. And then last week, we talked about how a budget can help. And that was a much shorter, condensed lesson, but how a budget can be a tool that can help us as we interact with money. And tonight, we are simply going to talk about this idea of giving to the church. And I know, again, that seems like, oh, great, here comes the lesson where you're going to talk about how you should be giving to the church. But as I came to the conclusions that I came to as I was studying and preparing for this lesson, it was not something that you often hear preached or taught about money in the church. So please don't zone out or just be like, oh, whatever, I'm just going to ignore this, because I think it will be beneficial for you as middle school and high school students just to begin thinking about your money and think along these lines. So when I was in high school, I was not super athletic, but I did enjoy sports. I did enjoy playing sports, and my main sport was soccer. Now, I've told you guys some stories of me and my soccer days before, and so I wasn't great at soccer. I was never on the varsity team. I was never a superstar, but I really, really enjoyed playing soccer. And one night, our youth group had an overnighter. Now, for our overnighter, we didn't decide. Our student minister decided to take us to this sports complex and just be there all night long. And so we went to this sports complex, and there were multiple basketball courts and multiple volleyball courts, and I think there were some tennis courts. And inside this sports complex, there was this giant indoor soccer field. I was pumped. I was like, this is going to be an awesome night. It's going to be absolutely incredible. And so I'm hanging out with my friends. We're playing all kinds of different stuff. And my friend Josh and I are hanging out, and we're playing some basketball. Josh, you have to understand something about Josh. Josh was like the opposite of me. Josh was really athletic. He was really good at sports and what he did. He was a football player, he was a basketball player, but his main sport was basketball. And so we played some basketball throughout the night, and of course he just demolished me because that was his sport. And eventually I was like, Josh, let's go play some soccer. He's like, I don't know, like I'm not a big soccer player. And he was like, CJ, that's really your sport. And he knew, stepping onto the soccer field with me, like, that was my sport. That's what I did. I had done it since the time I was like 5 years old. And he was like, I don't know, like you're just gonna crush me. And I was like, oh, come on, I'll take it easy on you. And so after some badgering, he decided to play. And we went out on the field. We were the only ones on the field. One-on-one soccer skills right here. And so I'm like, okay, he may have beat me in basketball, but now he's on my turf, literally, because we are on a turf soccer field in the indoor. And I'm like, okay, and I've got the ball at my feet, and I'm like, all right, I'm going to dribble toward him and do it like this fancy move and get around him and then go score a goal and be like, booyah, right? And so I dribble up toward him, and I try to do my fancy move, and he kicks the ball away from me. Well, not a huge deal. But I turn and I try to chase him down. He takes it all the way down the field and scores a goal. I'm like, crap. Okay, so I'm like, all right, let's try this again. And so I dribble toward him. Same thing happens a second time. And then a third time. And then I'm like, okay. Let's do it the other way where like he tries to dribble toward me, because then I'll be able to kick the ball from him and I'll just take the ball down and I'll score. So he dribbles the ball toward me. He scoots it past me, sprints by me, and goes by and scores. I'm like, what is going on? And this went on a couple more times before we were both exhausted from sprinting down the soccer field. And we were like, all right, we're done. Josh was very, very kind. He was like, dude, it's like 3 a.m. You're probably just exhausted. And I was like, yeah, I probably am. But deep down, I knew the truth. There were 2 things that I learned that night that were very, very important. One, I am not very athletic. I'd already known that, but it was just confirmed again, I am not very athletic. And so Josh was able to just scoot the ball by me and sprint much faster than I could and go score. Second thing that I learned that night is the thing that I appreciate about soccer more than almost any other sport is how much of a team sport soccer is. I realize that I may not be the best soccer player, but as a part of a team where I can receive the ball and then pass the ball off to someone else and move it down the field with teammates, I still have a spot on the field. I still have an important role to play on the soccer team. Paul, who is the guy that wrote most of the New Testament. You guys have heard me talk about Paul a few times before. He's the guy that was killing Christians, and then he saw a bright light, and then he turned to Jesus, and he spent the whole rest of his life spreading Jesus' message and starting churches and writing letters to these churches and helping them grow and improve and become the best that they could possibly be as churches and Jesus followers. And those letters that he wrote became the books of our New Testament. And so Paul is writing this letter. He wrote a couple letters to this church in Corinth. And in this church in Corinth, Paul lays out the foundation of how he views the church. In 1 Corinthians chapter 12, we're going to start in verse 12, but then we're going to jump to 18 to 21. It says this: Christ is just like the human body. A body is a unit and has many parts. And all of the parts of the body are one body, even though they are many. But as it is, God has placed each one of the parts in the body just like he wanted. If all were one and the same body part, what would happen to the body? But as it is, there are many parts, but one body. So the eye can't say to the hand, I don't need you. Or in turn, the head can't say to the feet, I don't need you. Paul's main point to the church is this: everybody has a role. Everybody has a place. Everybody has a spot. Everybody is important. I love the way that Paul talks about the body, and there's a whole lot more that Paul says, and we won't read anymore because I've already read enough. That's a lot of words on one page. But Paul goes on to say, listen, you can't look at other people and be like, dude, I don't need you. Like the head can't say to the legs, man, I don't need you. Because the legs are pretty important to our life and being able to move around and interact with people. And the same thing, like the hand can't say to the tongue, listen, I don't need you. Like every part of the body has a role and has a purpose and has a place. And I love that Paul then turns around and says it the other way as well, because oftentimes we look at ourselves and we say, all right, listen, I'm not super popular. I don't have a whole lot of influence, so I must not be important. And Paul goes on to say in a few verses later, the hand also can't say, well, because I'm not a stomach, I don't belong. And the stomach can't say, because I'm not the head, I don't have a role. Because every person that is a person that believes in Jesus Christ, that is a Jesus follower, has a purpose and has a role to play on this earth. Every part of the body is important. And as I played soccer with Josh that night, I realized that I may not be the most athletic, and I may not be able to go one-on-one against Josh in soccer. And I had this moment sitting there on the soccer field, standing there walking off the soccer field. I had this moment where I thought, maybe I don't belong on the soccer team. But the truth of the matter is, even though I was never on varsity, and even though I never was a superstar, the teams that I was on, I had a role, I had a purpose, and I was able to help my team succeed. And we have to understand, this is the foundation that Paul lays out when he thinks about the group of people that are Jesus followers. So as you think about the whole rest of the New Testament and all of the things that Paul writes and all of the things that Paul said, everything that he says about how we interact with other people, what we do, who we are, the roles we have to play, they all come back to this moment where Paul says, there's no one that's a Jesus follower that is not important. Everybody is important. You are important. You have a role to play. You've been given gifts and talents and abilities to be able to reach people that, guys, I will never be able to reach. I just don't have those talents. I don't have those relationships, but you do. And Paul says, you are able to go and do that. You are an important part of the body. Jump ahead to Paul's second letter to the Corinthians. The second letter to the Corinthians was written about a year after the first letter. And this is where things kind of come full circle, and we're talking about giving and money. I know that so far, it's not been a whole lot about money, but here Paul kind of brings it full circle in 2 Corinthians. He says this. He's encouraging the church to give and to support one another. He's got multiple churches that he is helping. And what Paul did is Paul would take money from one church that was doing really, really well. And he, as the person that kind of went out and started all these churches, knew what churches needed a little extra, knew where people were hurting and in need. And so he would take this money and he would give it to the churches that were in need. And so he's encouraging the church in Corinth to give, and he says this: a gift is appreciated because of what a person can afford, not because of what that person can't afford. If it is apparent that it's done willingly. It isn't that we want others to have financial ease and you financial difficulties, but it's a matter of equality. We're going to start at the end of the verse. It's a matter of equality. It's a matter of equality. Paul says this. Paul says, listen, you are a part of the body. And there are other parts of the body that you can help. And I want to encourage you to help. I want to encourage you to give. If you continue to read the verses that follow this, which we won't read, he says, you have something that you can give, and it's possible that your gift can help someone that is in desperate need of that gift that you have given. And he says, you have this opportunity to give. And so I want to encourage you to give. And this is where things get a little bit dicey in the church world, because this is where you start hearing preachers talk about, well, you need to give a tithe. You need to give 10%, like 10% of everything you make needs to go to the church first. You hear preachers talk about you need to give till it hurts, so you trust God and you prove that you are putting all your faith in God and not in money. And you hear preachers say you need to give so that God will give back to you and you'll be successful and good things will come your way. Notice, Paul doesn't say any of that. If we jump to the front of the verse, the big question, how much do I give? Paul's very relaxed. Paul doesn't say there's a specific amount. Paul says, actually, a gift is appreciated because of what a person can afford, not because of what they can't afford, as long as it's done willingly. You see, it's not so much about how much you give. It's just about being a part of the body. It's about saying, all right, I'm going to receive the ball as a soccer player, and what I'm going to do to move the ball down the field and to help my team score and get a victory, I'm going to pass the ball off to somebody else. And what the cool thing is that I played midfield as a soccer player. And I could receive the ball as a midfielder and pass the ball to my left to another midfielder who could then pass the ball forward to a striker or a forward. And the truth of the matter is, I received the ball. If I had taken the ball straight toward the goal, I would have lost it. The defenders would have closed on me, and I would have lost the ball every time. But when a soccer team receives the ball, passes it, and then passes it again, the ball has just gone from me to somebody I never could have got the ball to if I tried. Because I was able to pass it off, and then it got passed off again. And Paul is saying, when you give gifts to the church, it's not about saying, I'm going to give 10%. I'm going to give till it hurts because I trust God. Paul's saying, listen, you just give what you can afford. Do it willingly. And that gift is going to get spread to places you never thought you could ever reach. I know for our church, personally on Sunday mornings, when we give, we reach other countries. We reach organizations right here in Brazil. We partner with a thing called Clay County Benevolence, which is an organization that specifically helps people that are in need. And they've got the tools and the resources, and they do it all day, every day. It's what they do. And, I don't have the tools or the resources to help multiple people in Brazil. But my gift can be passed off to an organization that does have the resources that can help multiple people in Brazil. It's not about how much, it's about giving willingly. Paul gets even more specific later in 2 Corinthians. He says, God loves a cheerful giver. Paul has I'm jumping around on you, Shannon. Paul has two guidelines for giving. Give what you can afford and do it willingly. Do it cheerfully. Give what you can afford and do it willingly. Do it cheerfully. I stepped onto the soccer field that night, and I thought I was going to totally demolish Josh because I assumed that as a soccer player, I was the important one. And I walked off the soccer field that night realizing that without my team, I'm really not that great. With my team, I can succeed. With my team, I can beat people that are as athletic as Josh is. But without my team, I'm nothing. That's the way it is with the body. You have a role. You are important. You have the opportunity to use your gifts, your talents, your abilities, and you have the opportunity to give some money from time to time. And I know that you guys don't have a lot of interaction with money right now as middle school and high school students, but I want you to just begin thinking, as money comes in, is there some that you can afford to spread to places you may have never thought your money could reach? Is there some that you can afford to give to the church willingly? Because Paul is very explicit. God loves a cheerful giver. God doesn't want us to give because we feel coerced. God doesn't want us to give because we feel guilty. God's got enough money. He's going to do what he wants to do. But if we want to give cheerfully, man, he will take it, he will use it, and he will spread it further than we could ever imagine. And so my practical challenge to you guys tonight is for you to sit down sometime this week and simply ask yourself this question. As I receive money, birthday money, Christmas money, maybe you work a job, maybe you get an allowance. As I receive that, is there some I can afford to give back? Some I can afford to give to the church? Some that I can afford to allow God to spread further than I ever could have thought imaginable? Let me pray for you guys. God, thank you so much for the opportunity